Hello and welcome to the Weekly Sceptic, episode 85, coming at you from the Westminster podcast studio. I'm Nick Dixon, here with free speech dragon slayer Toby Young. And coming up this week, will Rishi Sunak call a general election? Keir Starmer claims to be the ultimate patriot, and the Met Police get in trouble for describing a man as openly Jewish. Plus, of course, peak woke and extra content for all our brilliant subscribers on basedmedia.org. But Toby, it's St. George's Day as we record, so have you been out celebrating, getting lashed, slaying dragons?
Well, I noted the BBC have pointed out that St. George is actually a Palestinian hero. They've got a piece up this morning. It really is peak BBC. Let's celebrate St. George's Day out of solidarity with our Palestinian friends who are currently being slaughtered by the evil Israelis. That was the gist of it.
That's so BBC. I can't believe they did that. Because normally we hear that he's Turkish, he's Greek, he's anything but English, he didn't exist.
The idea is actually he's a hero to the tiny minority of Christian Palestinians in places like Bethlehem, I suppose. And there are some churches, some Palestinian churches, which fly the flag of St. George on St. George's Day because he supposedly protected some of the early Christian martyrs who they particularly venerate in their particular branch of Christianity.
That's pretty base. You don't hear that much about the Palestinian Christians. It's controversial. I know a lot of our audience are very, very pro-Israel, but they did kick out, allegedly, about 30 Christian churches. This is what I heard. So I'm thinking about switching to the old pro-Palestinian, but the pro-Christian Palestine side, which you don't hear very much about.
Yeah, they're a small minority.
I'll be on the march, just like, down with Islam, up Palestine, Christian. I'll be like a tiny, really dangerous minority.
You could go on the pro-Palestinian march on Saturday through London, waving a St. George's flag, the cross of St. George.
And holding a big cross.
I'm holding a big cross, yeah. Dressed as St. George. Maybe in a Crusader costume. That'd probably be a little bit too far.
I'll be like, the pro-Israeli Jewish people hate me. The pro-Palestine Muslims hate me. I'm just like the tiny. There'll be like one other guy going, yeah, Christians in Palestine. Yeah, I've cleared up a few facts on X, formerly Twitter, about St. George's Day. You know, you get these people posting he was Turkish, blah blah. I've come in and said, your annual reminder that St. George was as English as it gets. He partook of many pies, that's a quote, had 3 lions upon his armour. The dragon was known to be French and favoured free movement and the customs union, and thus he was swiftly slain. Sorry if these facts trigger you, so I'm quoting directly from the various
And
texts.
I think as Paul Embry said, was it Paul Embry today, that after he'd slayed the dragon, he liked to go down the pub, drink 9 pints and start singing 2 World Wars and 1 World Cup.
Do that, yeah, that is true. So it's happy wankers posting about St. George being Turkish Day. Anything else, Toby? Was there something else you wanted to briefly address at the top?
No, I think we're going to do that in peak woke now.
Okay, good. We'll leave that bit in. It's always trying to agree what to do before the show, but this week we've agreed we should tackle Rishi Sunak. And do we need to say any promotions either? We haven't had any. We've got basedmedia.org. Have we got anything else coming up?
No, I don't think so.
Bombshells. We had Bombshells from NatCon.
Yeah,
that's doing very well.
That's doing very well, and that's currently up on basedmedia.org.
Yeah.
If you want to, and of course, if you become a subscriber now, not only do you get the premium content in our podcast, but in the Bombshells podcast too.
And there's some quite good premium stuff of like Nigel Farage doing shots and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's quite edgy content.
Yeah.
Okay, so basedmedia.org for all that. But for now, let's get into Rishi. So there's a few things. One, he said he will up defence spending to 2.5%, which is sort of breaking news, although Starmer's already claimed he'll do that.
By September 2030.
Oh, really?
So it's not immediate. Yeah.
It's not that exciting then, is it? You wanted to cover that as a breaking story. It's like 10 years. The Rwanda Bill, I believe, passed late last night, finally.
Yes.
That's the other thing. And then there's a speculation about will Starmer call a summer election. One quite interesting point Farage had, he said he will now call a summer election because he won't have a chance for his Rwanda bill to fail and be humiliated by it being put down by the European Court, and therefore he'll just go early before that can happen.
Yeah, so Farage's argument is that rather than risk trying to deport someone before the general election, only to have the European Court delay that deportation to Rwanda, better to fight the general election and say, if I win the general election, I can get on with deporting people under my new plan, because Labour have said they'll scrap the Rwanda deportation scheme. They say it's an expensive gimmick. But I think surely if Rishi wants to milk this for as many votes as he can, it would be better to try and deport someone, wait for the European Court to step in, and then fight a general election and say, if you vote for me, not only will I do X, Y, and Z, but I will start deporting people because we'll come out of the European Convention on human rights. We'll repeal the Human Rights Act, and that'll be, a key dividing line in the general election between Labour and the Conservatives. I mean, it's possible, but there are other reasons to think that Rishi might call a summer election. I think the main one is everyone thinks he's going to do really badly in the locals on May 2nd, and that will inevitably trigger speculation about his future. Could even mean enough letters go in to actually trigger a no confidence vote that could prompt a leadership election. So one way to avoid all that would be to pretty soon after the May election results call a summer election in late June, so that effectively secures his tenure until at least that general election has been lost. I mean, he seems to have gone into a kind of new, more frenetic kind of campaigning mode in the last couple of weeks. And it's as though he is gearing up for a general election sooner than the autumn. But against that, what Tim Shipman's points, Christopher Hope's points that he'll want to hang on until the autumn so he can say that he's been in office for 2 years, and if he goes before that, it'll just be, it'll be less than 2 years, which is kind of humiliating. Yeah,
the argument is it looks better on paper. You can say I was there for 2 years. People forget how rubbish it was. It just sounds like quite a long time. It doesn't feel like 2 years, but in history it'll sound like quite a long time, especially compared to Liz Truss. The other argument was MPs want their pay. They want a few months more pay, and they're like, let's push it as late as possible. We're not going to be in for very long. Let's rinse this last money, which is quite a ridiculous but very human reason. And yes, but people said he's in this new campaign mode. He said, no ifs, no buts. These flights are going for Rwanda. He said elsewhere, no European court or no foreign court, I believe, something like that, will stop this. I've lost the story, but he said something along those lines. And people are saying it's a new tough Rishi, which has taken a while, but has he finally realised what it takes to get things done in politics? And you can't be too nice.
He's clearly, drinking in the last chance saloon, wants to do whatever he can to shore up support, reduce the scale of his losses so he doesn't go down in history as, the Conservative leader who lost the most seats. Looks like, they're heading for an even bigger defeat than 97, which was a Labour landslide. So, it's not surprising that he's trying to give it one last college try. I still lean towards autumn election rather than summer election.
Okay.
We'll see.
Yeah, Rishi, it's very strange to me that he's put his entire reputation, he staked his reputation on this Rwanda thing. He's like, we will get this through, because no one even cares. I mean, the voters don't care, really. It's good to do it, but it's not going to win over people who are really concerned about immigration necessarily, because no one thinks it's going to be that effective. It's a strange policy to sort of hang everything on, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it's one of his 5 pledges, so
Right.
He's sort of locked in. I suppose, of course, you and I know that legal migration is, 9/10 of the problem. Even though it is a problem that illegal migrants are coming in on small boats, that's a tiny fraction of the number of migrants that enter our country each year. Most of them, the vast majority, are legal migrants because the government gives them visas. That's the real issue. But I think mainly, perhaps the public hasn't quite grasped that. Perhaps they think that many more people are coming in on rubber dinghies than are coming in perfectly legally as dependents of students or whatever.
I doubt they really think that. It's more sensational, the dinghies, but I doubt anyone really thinks the boats are a bigger problem.
I suppose his hope, I guess, must be that even though the cost of sending each individual migrant to Rwanda is huge, I mean it's hundreds of thousands of pounds per migrant, given how much the policy is costing. But the hope must be that it deters people from using that route, that it'll put the people traffickers in Calais out of business. And I think in the past, to be fair, when they put this deportation deal in place with the Albanian authorities, it did significantly reduce the number of Albanians coming across on small boats. And now the highest the highest nationality are Vietnamese. So we've now got the Vietnamese have replaced the Albanians as the largest ethnic group currently coming in via small boats. So these policies can deter people from using that particular route. So it might do something. It might have some impact on the small boats, but it is, as you say, a bit of a drop in the ocean.
Okay, and the defence spending, I don't know if that's going to do anything. If it's 2030, it doesn't seem particularly important. I mean, it is important because NATO is seen as weak, and we have to start spending. All European countries have to start spending, and we actually do meet our bills, but most of Europe doesn't even bother to meet their requirements. So we have to start doing that. We might not get help from America, we being kind of NATO when I'm formulating this. So we've definitely got to start spending more on... Where's it going to come from, though? I don't understand where the money's going to come from.
Yeah, they haven't actually said where the money's going to come from. But I imagine the reason he's done this is to close down a vulnerability the Tories had to being attacked on this issue by Labour in a general election campaign, because Labour have pledged to increase defence spending to 2.5%.
Okay. Well, should we quickly do this other Tory story, which was absolutely shocking? This MP, Mark Menzies, quits Conservatives after claims he misused party funds. And that's putting it fairly mildly, because he claimed to be trapped. He was being held by so-called bad people and needed money to pay them. And he convinced a 78-year-old woman who was some sort of secretary in the party, you can probably give me the details, to sort of wire him this money instantly at like 3 a.m.
Well, not quite. So yeah, he was trapped in, I guess, what we'll have to call a trap house.
Was he actually?
He claims that he was being held hostage by some bad men. So he'd what did he say? He said that he'd met someone on an online dating website. He'd gone to the man's flat before subsequently going with another man to a second address where he continued drinking. It was then falsely claimed, according to sources close to him, that he had been sick at one point, and several people at the second address he'd gone to then demanded £5,000, claiming it was for cleaning up his sick as well as other expenses. God knows what they were. Anyway, he called his former campaign manager, waking her up at 3:15 in the morning. As you say, she was 78. But she refused to send him the money. She said she would discuss it with, I don't know, the secretary of his constituency association the following morning. His constituency office manager. And then a few hours later, the constituency office manager stumped up the money, by which time it had increased to 6,500, and she was only able to wire him that money by cashing in her ISA. I mean, it really is extraordinarily bad behaviour, taking advantage seemingly of these kind of nice old ladies who are supposed to be kind of looking after him and who are the kind of backbone of the local Conservative Party. And they eventually complained, or one of them did, to Conservative Party Central Office, and the investigation began. And one of the kind of politically significant things about this story is supposedly CCHQ knew about it for a long time, and the investigation was ongoing, but nothing had been done. He hadn't been forced to relinquish the whip. And he now, in fact, he resigned the whip, and now he said he's going to stand down as an MP at the next general election and not try and get reinstated as a Conservative MP even between now and then. But it is shocking. I mean, seemingly every week there's a scandal in the papers about a gay Conservative MP.
I think we're just going to say a gay then and leave it at that. About a gay. Yeah, he basically looked at William Ragg and just said, hold my drink, didn't he? Hold my Grindr app, because I'm going to do even worse. I mean, it's actually worse than Ragg. I mean, was he really actually trapped somewhere? Was he just pretending to be? Do we know anything about this? Was it just a scam to get money? Or was he actually in trouble? Do we know?
Well, who knows? It's not the first time he's got into trouble, and there are some allegations about him. So he was, I think, a minister in 2014 and had to stand down when a Brazilian rent boy, aged 19, told the Sunday Mirror that he had paid him for sex and asked him to buy an illegal drug, and claimed that Menzies had taken drugs on previous occasions. So he then resigned as a ministerial aide. And then later, 3 years later, so this would have been, I guess, in 2017, so 6 years ago, he was interviewed by police over bizarre accusations that he deliberately got an acquaintance's dog drunk. And when challenged over his actions, started a fight with his friend. That was a peculiar story. He denies it. And then there was this other story, which was, I think more recently, his constituency was abuzz with gossip about a drunken incident at last night of the Proms concert featuring Catherine Jenkins in the grounds of Lytham Hall. This was last August. He was invited to the event by the local mayor. He's said to have turned up intoxicated and got into a row with other patrons after discovering that seats had not been reserved for his party within the VIP section. And one attendee said the MP started kicking the chairs and poking the people on the front row, creating a disturbance for ticket holders who paid £150 each. This was for, I think, a charity. I mean, he does sound like a bit of a bad seed.
A bit of a wrong him.
Incidentally, the reason he is an elected MP is because he was on Cameron's A-list and was elected in 2010.
It's always the A-list people. I get emails about this A-list. What Cameron's so obsessed with diversity, he was just scraping the barrel, just getting anyone in. That's what it seems like. These are diversity hires. This is DIE in action.
It is extraordinary. And it makes you wonder, how gay is the Parliamentary Conservative Party? Douglas Murray wrote quite an amusing piece in The Spectator, I think. Was it last year? A Conservative minister was fired. This was, I think, by Boris Johnson when someone complained that a young Conservative activist complained that in the bar of the Midlands Hotel at kind of 2 a.m. This minister had made a pass at him. And so he denied it, but he stood down anyway. And Douglas Murray wrote this funny piece in The Spectator saying, this is absolutely ridiculous. For years, the Tory Party conference has been a kind of gay lollapalooza. Everyone knows that if you're a gay man, that's where you go to get some action. And if you're in the bar at the Midlands Hotel at 2 a.m. at the Tory Party conference, you're asking for it. You can't turn around and complain that a minister made a pass at you. That's why you're there, It was very funny, but he was like, I think there is this kind of actually quite burgeoning gay subculture, seemingly, surrounding the Conservative Parliamentary Party. So it's one reason, perhaps, why Rishi might call a summer election is to, is before any more of these kind of stories break about rogue gay Tory MPs paying off rent boys, demanding monies from little old ladies and their constituencies.
Yeah, I mean, they're only going to get more out of control in summer. Let's face it. Summer's when everything happens. So call the election now before any more gay stuff happens over the summer. That's really what you're saying.
Scandals.
I mean, I did see a stat on X, formerly Twitter, that gay people are massively overrepresented amongst MPs in terms of versus the general population.
Yeah.
I can't remember the numbers, but it is quite shocking.
Yeah.
You do wonder why that is. One wonders.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't spend a lot of time thinking about it, but it is strange, isn't it? It's sort of a gay. I mean, you can't. What can we say about it without it won't get us in trouble?
I wonder if there are more gay MPs in the Conservative Party than the Labour Party. I wonder if Rishi during the general election can point to all these scandals and say, look, Keir, they may not be the best behaved, but we've certainly got a lot more gays in our parliamentary ranks than you do.
MPs, but they are the gayest.
Yeah.
We've got the gayest front bench and back bench this country's ever seen. That's all politics is now. It's Rishi fighting Keir about diversity, isn't it? We're more diverse than you. Yeah, it's like, well, we've got more scandals than you. Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. So it's almost beyond belief, that particular story. It's almost worse than Rag. Well, all right, we've probably done enough on the Tories. Should we move on to Starmer then? Yeah,
so this again indicates that the election may come sooner rather than later. Starmer has been wrapping himself in the Union Jack and indeed the flag of St George, claiming that the Tories have relinquished any claim to be the patriotic party and that Labour is the truly patriotic party. But some of his arguments have been quite odd. So he said, he says, when you've trashed the economy, this is a piece he wrote for The Telegraph, when you've trashed the economy, hammered mortgage holders, weakened the union, neglected our forces, repeatedly broken laws you expected others to follow, and denigrated some of our proudest national institutions, from the BBC to the National Trust to the England football team, I'm afraid you have lost any right to call yourself a patriotic party. I mean, what? There was a sleight of hand in there, which is that if you criticise the if you criticise the National Trust for denigrating Britain's history and heritage and constantly apologising for the links between the historic houses you're supposed to be looking after and the slave trade, and if you criticise England players for taking the knee and accusing Britain of being structurally racist, that makes you unpatriotic. It's like we're supposed to allow these various institutions, which we're supposed to be proud of, to pour piss all over Britain and Britain's history and heritage, not say anything about it, because if we object in the slightest, according to Keir, that's unpatriotic. So defending our history and heritage from critics within the BBC or the National Trust or the England football team is unpatriotic, according to Starmer, which is kind of bit gaslighty, isn't it?
Yeah, and there was this part as well. Shouting woke doesn't just undermine the proud British tradition of free speech, dissent and independent thinking. At best, it suggests they don't have faith in the strength of our history, identity and flag to withstand discussion. At worst, they don't care if division weakens our nation, if it strengthens their grip on power. This was a very strange argument that talking about wokeness undermines free speech, like we should allow people to be woke. Well, maybe, but the problem is with woke is that, of course, it shuts down free speech. It wants to destroy the West. It's a cancer eating through the entire West. I mean, we know this. So criticising woke is to defend free speech and is to defend independent thinking and Western values, because wokeness is against all of those. So he's sort of saying somehow wokeness is sort of part of the rich tapestry of our traditions or some bollocks.
It's a really odd kind of intellectual somersault he's performing there. Yeah, he's claiming that if you criticise the woke for being illiberal authoritarians, that is an affront to free speech, because you should let them try and shut down others' free speech. You should let them smear and publicly shame and try and silence through intimidation and bullying their political opponents, because if you object, that suggests that you don't have much confidence in the robustness of the tradition of free speech. It's like, of course it can withstand a few attacks from these woke activists, and if you in any way defend it, that's to suggest you think it's weak and is in need of being defended. I mean, it's a ludicrous argument.
Yeah, bizarre argument, as was this other part, and this is in the video he posted as well. He said, that is why I have no time for those who flinch at displaying our flag, because the cross of St. George belongs to every person who loves this country and seeks to make it better, a symbol of pride, belonging and inclusion. We cannot allow it to become the preserve of the tiny minority who want to drive hatred in our communities. What has the St. George flag got to do with inclusion? I mean, pride I might give you, belonging, I guess, yeah, to England, and inclusion. It's not really inclusion, is it? I mean, flags include some people and they exclude others. That's why we have different flags and different nations. I mean, what has it got to do with inclusion? I think not even Britain. Even Britain is somewhat to do with inclusion, because it's a kind of concept.
It doesn't.
I
think the argument he's trying to make is that it's not just a symbol of white English people. It's a symbol of Englishness that the rich tapestry of our multi-ethnic populations in England should embrace. So it's inclusive in that respect. It's racially and ethnically inclusive, even if it's just to celebrate Englishness. But this message doesn't seem to have filtered down to the rest of the Labour Party's supporters. There was a piece in the Mail on Sunday saying 1 in 8 Labour voters think the Cross of St George is, quote, racist and divisive and should not be displayed, according to a poll carried out by the Mail on Sunday. Labour voters were 13 times as likely as Conservative supporters to describe England's flag as racist and divisive. So 74% of voters say no one should be offended by the Cross of St George, but the figure falls to 56% of 2019 Labour voters compared to 91% of 2019 Tory voters. So, you know, Keir Starmer's enthusiasm, newfound enthusiasm for the Cross of St George, doesn't appear to be reflected in the ranks of Labour voters, 1 in 7 of whom think it is racist and divisive. 1 in 8.
Right, yeah. And the other strange part was that he mentioned the lakes, which is good. He says, there are many moments in my life where I felt, however he talks, many moments in my life where I felt great pride and gratitude to be English. Being the first person in my working class family to go to university, question whether he's really working class, belting out 3 lines in the crowd at Wembley in 1996, all right, fairly generic, likes football, finally reaching the peak of Scarfell Pike, which is great because that's a reference to the lake, so I can accept that. But then he says, defending people facing the death penalty in other countries who look at our dedication to the rule of law with admiration. Well, that is a heck of a stretch that is some indication of patriotism. And then you look into it, which I have done before for my segment I did about euthanasia on the Lotus Eaters, and I found that the people he's defended were some of the worst monsters in the world. I mean, he went around the world defending these people. So one of them was a guy that buried his stepson. I need to find this guy. So the Sun did a whole piece on this, and you find that he's gone around the world. Here we go. Sakir also helped Malawian murderer Francis, some long name, who tied up his 2-year-old stepson before burying him alive, and the Ugandan axe killer who slaughtered his girlfriend in front of her children, who was also spared execution by a law change Sakir campaigned for as founding member of the Death Penalty Project. So why is he boasting about saving these horrific murderers? To me, it doesn't seem a source of pride, and I'm obviously pro-death penalty, but he wants to abolish the death penalty. But why is that patriotic as well?
I guess he thinks that the fact that we no longer have the death penalty in the UK is a source of national pride. So if you go round to these kind of Commonwealth countries and so forth, defending people who've been sentenced to death, then you're upholding that particular fairly recent British tradition. I suppose it's something he takes pride in about being British, the fact that we don't have the death penalty.
Yeah, which we only lost in the 60s for murder because of leftist agitation anyway, but now he sees it so British to not have it, which it hasn't been. It's incredibly recent. There's nothing English or British about not having the death penalty, really. He's saying, yeah, it's part of our great tradition, which is nonsense, and then he goes around the world letting off Ugandan murderers. I think it's a bizarre claim, but yeah, I mean, look, he's smart enough to try and appeal to patriots, and he does this kind of thing. He's smart enough to realise it's not great to hate the country, but he has the near impossible task of squaring that with wokeness, which is anti the country. And we saw recently those leaflets even had the British flag on, triggered a load of Labour people because we can't have the leaflets. Oh, we hate the country. So it's really impossible. He's saying it's inclusive, it's woke, but we're proud. We got the England football team, and I've let off some Ugandan murderers, and it's all kind of complete fudge.
Yeah. I think it clearly it's partly designed to get rid of the reputation Labour attracted when Jeremy Corbyn, who incidentally he supported and served in the shadow cabinet of, but when Corbyn was leader, I think Labour had a patriotism problem. People who'd served in the armed forces, or whose family members had served, or whose friends had served, thought that there was something a bit odd about the leader of the Labour Party always siding with Britain's enemies in every international dispute dating back to the Second World War.
It's a bit off.
A bit off. And so he's clearly trying to, diffuse that particular criticism by wrapping himself in the flag. But I think he's worried that Rishi's going to lean into some of these culture war issues during the general election campaign, particularly in light of the Cass review. I don't know if you saw, but Labour's shadow Justice Minister, earlier today, said she agreed with J.K. Rowling about the Cass review, which was an interesting pivot. But they're clearly, I think, very worried that they're vulnerable on that issue in particular, and he's trying to scare off Rishi from going too hard on Labour being the party of woke. He's going to claim that that's unpatriotic, that it's an assault on free speech. Everybody should be able to air their views on these controversial issues, as though it's been our side rather than the other side who've been shutting down debate on these issues. But I think he's nervous about those issues becoming too prominent during the general election campaign. So he's trying to shut that down now.
Yeah, interesting. It's tricky for him given what Labour fundamentally are. Do you think he's been listening to Blair? Sort of the Blair leadership manual and all the Blair, and was like, tone down all that woke stuff. People hate it.
Yeah. And also Blair wrapped himself in the flag on the eve of the 97 general election too. So
cool Britannia.
Yeah, so it could easily be, Blair saying, you've got a problem. People think of you as anti-British. They think of the Labour Party as hating Britain's history and heritage, of supporting these woke critics who claim that we are institutionally racist, that we've got a problem with colonialism, that our economic prosperity is rooted in the slave trade. That's electoral kryptonite. Get rid of all that. Wrap yourself in the flag.
Cool Britannia was a bit cringe, but it was far more believable than Starmer as it wrapped in the St. George's flag, face paint, going 3 lions and killing people and letting people off the hook in Malawi. It was more, Cool Britannia at least had Britpop, some good music.
I played a small part in persuading Tony Blair to embrace Cool Britannia. And that it would be an electoral asset.
You're like Zelig. You're like everything's about history. Toby's there. Incidentally, I was living with Toby at the time. You're like one of these guys in a Talking Head documentary, which you've done a lot of. I was there.
Well,
carry on.
The story is that I was actually working for Vanity Fair at the time,
right.
And this was '96. We were putting together the Vanity Fair Cool Britannia issue, which didn't come out until March '97. But in late '96, we were pulling it together, and we wanted to persuade Tony Blair, then the leader of the opposition, to appear as part of the Cool Britannia photo shoot. It was the Spice Girls, it was Blur, it was the designers, the new Savile Row designers like Oswald Boateng, and we wanted Blair in there, as part of the kind of Cool Britannia moment we were enjoying. And I talked to one of his spads who I knew, and the spad's counter argument was, well, isn't this something that John Major can claim credit for? Because if we're enjoying, this moment in the spotlight now, if there's a kind of British cultural renaissance in pop, in fashion, in food, then shouldn't John Major get the credit? Because this is happening before Labour are actually in power. So it'll only help them, it won't help us. And I had to talk him round and say, no, I think Tony Blair will be able to surf that wave into Downing Street. People will think, it's part of the future of Britain. It's not something the Tories can in any way claim credit for. They're so toxic now. No one's going to think Major, grey John Major, who tucks his shirt into his underpants. No one's going to think Cool Britannia has anything to do with him. It'll help Tony Blair. And I persuaded him, and sure enough, Blair posed for the picture in that issue of Vanity Fair, and that's now an iconic picture of Blair posing as leader of the opposition on the eve of winning a landslide general election victory.
So what you're saying is you're partly responsible for the disaster of Blairism, the destroying of the country. We still live in the Blairite paradigm because of you and your poster. Why were you helping Blair?
I just thought it would be good to get him in the magazine. It would make for a good picture, good for the photo spread. I wasn't really thinking politically. I was just trying to, impress my boss at the time.
Shocking scenes, Toby. I can't believe it. You were part of that era. You were on the telly a lot in that era. You used to think, who's this wanker? But you turn out to be much nicer than I thought. But you were on the telly a lot in that time, being a bit provocative, weren't you? Kind of being a bit laddish. That was that era, wasn't it?
Yeah, that was that era. Yeah. Being laddish then was kind of more acceptable. It wasn't
better times, actually.
Better times.
I've dissed you there, but really, it was better times. Except for Blair and what turned out to be the evil legacy of Blair, started by Toby Young.
By the way, I've got just
one more
coda to that anecdote.
Okay.
After you've done a photo shoot, when you're styled and you're given clothes to put on, you're supposed to give them back afterwards. But Blair, he tried on 3 different ties, chose the one he thought looked best, and kept all 3.
Kept the ties.
Yeah.
That's so Blair. Can you imagine Blair's like, always keep the ties. Like part of the leadership manual he gives to Starmer. If someone gives you a tie, keep it. Yeah, that's like with the weird thumb pointing. Look, a lot of people say, I can't even do Blair. I need to relearn Blair. Blair, just the dark lord behind everything, manipulating the scenes,
get the
keeping
pauses
ties.
Right. Get the pauses right. She was, in every sense, the people's princess.
That's a lot of pauses. That's almost too many. Maybe that was the secret. Okay. Well, that's pretty much Starmer covered. We've done a fair chunk on him there. Should we move on and do this other story, the Met Police? This is a pretty big story. So the Met Police, I'm sure you've all seen, got in trouble. They referred to a man as openly Jewish, Gideon Falter. I don't know exactly if that's the correct pronunciation of the campaign against anti-Semitism. And the story sort of keeps going and going because initially there was the terrible looking video where the policeman says, you're openly Jewish, you're in this protest, and he suggests he's going to arrest him because he's creating a fuss, he's creating danger for himself because he might inflame the angry mob. And now that we have anarcho-tyranny, you have to arrest people for making other people angry and violent. It's a great system, Toby. It's called victim blaming. So we've got anarcho-tyranny victim blaming, and it looked very, very bad. Then the Met Police issued an apology, which basically said, well, look, they are out there provoking them. Not really our fault. It was like a sort of non-apology, suggesting, again, it was kind of their fault. made it sound even worse. They then apologized for the apology, said, sorry about that earlier apology, we were completely wrong, we're just sorry. So it's a kind of Russian doll system of endless apologies, kind of nightmarish, infinite regress of apologies. And then it's twisted again because a full video comes out, a sort of 13-minute video of the full exchange where, to be honest, the policeman does come across a lot better. He's trying to help him. He says, it's not because you're Jewish, it's just that it's a protest, no one can go that way, I'll let you go around this way. And he's going back and forth with him. And the guy is being a little bit irritating, and the policeman's sort of getting annoyed. Not that it's okay to say, well, it's because you're openly Jewish. Obviously, he lost his patience there and kind of just worded it badly. I thought the policeman did come across a bit better in that video. And Mark Rowley, anyway, has completely defended him. Mark Rowley has said his conduct was professional. He says the wider actions and intent of the officer were professional and in the best tradition of British police trying to prevent disorder. So he's completely stood by him, which is interesting. And there was also a piece about morale being at rock bottom. This was in the Eye yesterday as we record. Rock bottom morale and social media pylons inside the Met's protest problem. And it was just saying a lot of cops are giving up. They feel they can't do anything right. They'll get slammed on social media. And they do have a kind of impossible position. Individual officers, this is my stance, I feel sorry for individual officers who are trying to do their best, but they're in a fundamentally impossible position because the regime, as I like to call it, sends down the orders, and Sadiq Khan is very regime, and he's pro-Palestine, no doubt, and the regime's pro-Palestine. And more than that, the regime has settled on anarcho-tyranny as its system of governance, and it's settled on despising the people. So the police can only be the foot soldiers of the regime. That's their job. So of course the people are going to turn against them. Of course they're going to feel that we can't get this right, because they fundamentally serve the god of the woke regime. What do you think?
Well, I think the police have certainly been put in a very difficult position, but I think they've been poorly led. And Mark Rowley coming out today and saying, "I stand by the officer. I'm going to defend the officer," is a form, I think, of trying to deflect from the real point, which is his leadership, not whether this particular officer made the right call in the circumstances. And even Gideon Falter, I think, he didn't name the officer. He blurred out his face, I think, in the video that he posted, and he said, I can appreciate that he was just trying to do his job, and he's been put in a very difficult position, and he wasn't intending, to criticise that particular officer. I mean, I think the difficulty is that so the mayor and Sir Mark Rowley are maintaining it is safe for Britain's Jews to go about their business on Saturdays in places like London, where these pro-Palestinian marches are taking place. They don't actually pose a threat to the safety of British Jews. That's their claim. So Gideon Falter was saying, well, if that's true, then I can surely just walk across the road. I can even walk in the opposite direction to the direction the march is going in with a skull cap on, and I'll be completely safe. And of course the police wouldn't let him do that, because it's a lie that Jews are completely safe to go about their business and walk the streets of London, particularly those streets which are kind of part of the main protest routes for the pro-Palestinian marchers. So the police were saying, yes, well, you are safe because I can guarantee your safety if you go this way. And the police officer was trying to force Gideon to cross the road going in another way, not directly through the flow of pro-Palestinian marches. I don't want to go that way. If the streets are safe for Jews, why should I have to go a roundabout way? Are you saying I won't be safe if I go in this most direct route? And it became a bit of a standoff. But and there's I think, I'm not sure whether to describe it as a protest or not, but Gideon Falter and the Campaign for Antisemitism, against Antisemitism, are organising an event, a gathering this Saturday for people who want to walk about being openly Jewish, or because some of their friends are Jewish. I think I'm going to go down, actually. It's this Saturday in London. They haven't said where the kind of rendezvous point's going to be, but I imagine it'll be, a counter protest, which at some point does try and intersect with the pro-Palestinian march. And it's not clear what the police will do. I mean, they'll be, I imagine, again, put in a very difficult position.
Yeah, I expect that's going to get a bit nasty in some way, that protest. But yeah, good luck to everyone. The other aspect of this, and I can't log into Twitter because my phone's decided to break during the recording, and I can't even get in on the laptop because it sends a code to your phone. So I'm trying to get into Twitter because the other aspect of this is the ongoing Tommy Robinson case, which is related to this. So one case against this Gideon chap is that he said that Tommy Robinson shouldn't be allowed at these marches, at the anti-Semitic, at the,
there was a campaign against anti-Semitism march.
Yeah.
A couple of months ago in central London.
Yeah, and he said that Tommy Robinson shouldn't be here and shouldn't have any part of it. And a spokesperson for Campaign Against Antisemitism said, contrary to what Tommy Robinson appears to believe, the drunken far-right thugs who came to protect the cenotaph on Armistice Day are not allies of the Jewish community and not welcome at our Solidarity March. So they got rid of him, and this led to him Tommy Robinson getting in trouble with the police. And so Tommy's keeps going on X and pointing out the hypocrisy of Gideon Falter. And even Michelle Juby raised this on GB News, which I was quite surprised at. And I raised it briefly on Headliners as well, because I thought it was fair to at least mention that he's complaining, I'm not allowed at these protests, but he did the same to Tommy Robinson, and it's got him in a lot of hot water. And there's an ongoing sort of court case, and the latest I heard on it was that a senior Metropolitan Police officer who signed a dispersal order allegedly breached by Tommy Robinson has admitted it may not have been lawful, and he used the wrong date on the paperwork. So Tommy is fighting that. Do you think there's any element of hypocrisy here?
I don't think, not really, because Gideon Falter doesn't purport to be, a free speech campaigner who is arguing that he should be allowed to protest alongside the pro-Palestinian protesters for kind of civil rights reasons. He's saying I should be allowed to go about my business as an openly Jewish person in London without fearing for my safety on a Saturday afternoon in the centre of London. It's a different argument. He's not saying I should be allowed to do that for free speech reasons, because everyone has a right to protest about whatever they want on these protest days, and they can join in the march if they want, and if you're stopping them from doing that, that's a breach of their civil rights. That's not his argument. If that was his argument, then yes, he'd look like a hypocrite. But his argument is that Jewish people are placed in danger by these marches through our city centres every Saturday, and the police cannot guarantee the safety of Jews to go about their business, and therefore these marches shouldn't take place. I mean, if anything, he's the opposite of a civil libertarian. I think he wants to stop the pro-Palestinian marches on the grounds that they're endangering the safety of Jewish people. So I think to claim that he's being hypocritical about this is a bit of a stretch.
Right. There's also a slight difference maybe a significant difference in that if you're not allowed at a protest because you're Jewish, that's based on your sort of ethnicity. It's it's a religion and it's a race. Whereas with Tommy Robinson, he's saying he doesn't want him there because of his ideological stances or his activism and his history of activism. So I guess it's a little bit different. It's not who he is immutably. There's a slight difference there as well. You could argue.
And I think I was actually there. I didn't actually see Tommy Robinson being arrested, but I was at that campaign against anti-Semitism march. It didn't take place on the same day as a pro-Palestinian march. It took place on a Sunday. But Tommy Robinson wasn't trying to cross the road when that march was taking place and stopped from doing so by the police because they couldn't guarantee his safety. He was there with a camera crew wanting to interview, I think, people on that counter demonstration. But this is separate, I think. It's not that Gideon Falter was trying to organise any kind of counter protest or participate as a protester in the pro-Palestinian protest. He just wanted to go about his business as a private Jewish citizen. That was his argument. He was being prevented from doing that, and the police couldn't guarantee his safety if he wore, a skull cap. It's a different issue.
Okay. It did seem bizarre that Tommy Robinson was banned, I think, for 6 months from even entering London or something absurd. We all know that the state decides to come down disproportionately hard on him, which is looking increasingly strange because the reason he should be, or he originally thought he would be aligned perhaps with this campaign against anti-Semitism is actually Tommy Robinson is very big on Israel, has a kind of Zionist position. I'm not quite sure at this point why the authorities and why the mainstream are so obsessed with him being the boogeyman. It's kind of a bit outdated because really you look at his positions, they're quite liberally he's been arguing with people on X because they're right wing and he's very sort of multiculturalism or some version of it. And he says things like, and he's very, very pro-Israel. So it looks just like a sort of neocon or something at this point to me. He doesn't even look particularly extreme. I guess
Gideon's concern and why he didn't want Tommy Robinson to be on that counter demonstration is because he didn't want people to think that part of the impetus for that counter demonstration was being opposed to British Muslims. And I guess he was worried that if Tommy Robinson was part of it and publicised his participation in it, it would be easier to kind of smear the counter protest as Islamophobic, or something along those lines. Incidentally, I don't think it was right of him to ask the police to remove Tommy Robinson, and I wrote a piece in The Spectator saying actually they shouldn't have done that, and Tommy Robinson should have been allowed to join that protest. So I'm not defending Gideon's expulsion, as it were, or asking the police to expel Robinson on that day, but I don't think that it makes him a hypocrite for objecting to not being able to cross the road last Saturday.
Okay, it's good you wrote that piece. That's the kind of piece that you write and people say, why is Toby Young not commenting on this? Why are the Free Speech Union silent? And they're like, here's all the links. But yeah, they do say that kind of thing a lot. Okay, well, fair enough, yeah. And the Islamophobia aspect, that's what I have heard Tommy's not that keen on Islam, so it could be that could be the reason, or aspects of Islam. I don't want to misrepresent it. Okay, well, that's our main story is pretty much covered. Toby, do you want to do our advert?
Yes. So this is an ad from Thor, our most loyal supporter. Believe it or not, you can improve your situation remarkably with one choice. Although my client Robert sold his company for $1 billion, money was never his guiding force. His guiding value was steady focus on this one choice. Robert had humble working-class origins, but as he grew from engineer to manager to CEO and eventual successful exit, he chose to focus on one thing that most avoid due to their fears or discomfort. What was it Robert prioritized? Communicating. Specifically, Robert invested in guidance for public speaking, storytelling, and presenting throughout his career. Why choose to repeatedly put himself through this process? Because, Robert told me, communication, confidence, and capability, and enjoying it, is a number one priority for winning. From initial promotions to his MBO finance deal, to competitive pitch wins with his new venture, and then the market differentiation story which led to his eventual acquisition. Now semi-retired, Robert still refers clients to me at all stages of their career because he knows they'll enjoy growth in confidence and results with me. To choose your communication focus and enjoy it, like Robert did, go to growthpresenter.com for your free confidence call. That's growthpresenter, all one word, .com for a free call. Thank you, Thor.
All right, well, thanks to Thor. And now let's go to everyone's favourite section. It's Peak Woke. So, Toby, Peak Woke this week is slightly stretching the definition, but Chris Packham said a slightly woke thing about the Daily Sceptic.
Yes, so on Laura Kunzberg's show on Sunday morning on BBC One on Sunday, they were debating net zero, and it wasn't a balanced panel. It was Chris Packham, Layla Moran, and Luke Johnson. But Luke Johnson, entrepreneur, bit of a climate contrarian, at least was able to put the kind of alternative point of view when they were talking about net zero. And at one point, Chris Packham started banging on about extreme weather events. I think the context was that Luke was saying that ordinary people will be paying the price for net zero in terms of increased energy bills, having to cope with the cold and so forth, cars that don't work properly because they're EVs. And Chris Packham shot back with, well, what about the ordinary people in Dubai who've suffered these downpours in the last couple of weeks and flooding? What about the ordinary people of Mali who've been suffering from these extraordinary heat waves? What about them? And Luke said, well, show me the evidence that those extreme weather events are linked to, the burning of fossil fuels, to carbon emissions. And at that point, Chris Packham got quite angry, and he said, well, you certainly won't find that evidence in Toby Young's Daily Sceptic. And he
Nice.
he said, which is put together by people with close connections to the fossil fuels industry. He says, if you want the evidence, it's called science.
Nice.
The BBC Politics then clipped this and put it out on Twitter, and Laura Kunzberg retweeted it, and at last count it had something like 850,000 views. And it's just straight out misinformation. None of the people who put together the Daily Sceptic have any connections to the fossil fuel industry. It's typical of the ad hominem way in which the defenders of net zero go about trying to prosecute their case, rather than engage in actual argument, rather than actually present Luke Johnson with any evidence that extreme weather events are linked to the burning of fossil fuels. He just immediately accused those who ask for the evidence, who challenge that hypothesis of being in the pay of big oil. It's an absolutely typical move. But in this case, it's just complete balls. We're not in the pay of big oil. I sometimes wish we were in the pay of big oil. I mean, it's just, and Chris Packham himself is very quick to sue people for libel, and successfully sued the editor of, I think, Country Squire for libel. That case concluded last year, cost him millions of pounds. So for him to be so incautious in spreading about these completely malicious, false smears about the Daily Sceptic seems pretty extraordinary. And then for the BBC to then promote these without even checking them. The BBC set up BBC Verify last year, supposedly to tackle the kind of growing threat of disinformation. And here's the BBC putting out this clip on Twitter, which contains absolutely naked, straight-up misinformation about the Daily Sceptic. I think I'm going to make a complaint to the BBC about it.
Well, you should do more than that. A couple of things. You said fossil fuel there, but I think he did say oil industry, and that sounds quite grand and like there might be money involved. So I was thinking, Chris Packham needs to see who actually is involved in the Daily Sceptic. It's just a bunch of harmless oddballs. It really is. It's Will, nice guy, you know what I mean? Wives of vicar. These are not people with ties to big oil. I've contributed to it. Loner, former comedian, just nothing to do with big oil. Would love to be. There's a bunch.
He said, I quote, evidence doesn't come from Toby Young's Daily Sceptic, which is basically put together by a bunch of professionals with close affiliations to the fossil fuel industry.
Okay, that's what he said.
What's my affiliation to the fossil fuel industry?
It's a bunch of harmless oddballs who are trying to do something good in the world, and absolutely non-fossil based people. And you should sue him. I saw people saying you should sue him.
Well,
and you should.
I'm slightly reluctant to kind of reach for Britain's libel laws.
You've got the Free Speech Union.
What
are you doing? What are you doing about it? You've got a whole company.
I think
company you can sue one company you can defend one company with the other company.
I think the risk of
conflict of interest.
The risk of suing him is that it would paint a big target on the Daily Sceptic's back, and if we ever get anything wrong when talking about the involvement of various green billionaires in the kind of net zero propaganda machine, they would immediately sue us for libel. They said, well, all bets are off now. He sued Chris Packham for libel, let's get him. So I think that would be risky and could end in the Daily Sceptic being shut down. I think better to submit a complaint to the BBC, and I think it's a complaint they'd have to take seriously, because not only was it on a BBC programme and the BBC tweeted it, but in addition, Chris Packham is an ex-BBC presenter and he's got a BBC programme he's presenting coming up. So it really did, this slur, this completely false smear has the imprimatur of the BBC. So I think they'll take the complaint seriously, and hopefully they'll have to, at the very least, apologise for it.
And then there's the emotional pain that you felt. I've seen how upset you've been about it. You've been distraught.
The funny thing is,
it's the first time I've seen you cry. I didn't even know you could.
The funny thing is that all these kind of publications that are in the same trench as Chris Packham immediately hailed this as an incredibly eloquent and brilliant, mic drop moment on Chris Packham's part. So the Canary said, Chris Packham just humiliated Kunzberg's preposterous climate-denying guest. Another publication, which I'd never heard of, admittedly, called The London Economic, which describes itself as a digital newspaper with a metropolitan mindset. Shock. Nice. It said, with science on his side, Chris Packham was able to deliver a devastating put-down when challenged on the evidence of climate change. I can't help feeling it would have been even more devastating had one iota of it actually been true.
Yeah, it was shocking. Also, he seems to be going for a bit of a Dan Mutton style, the Daily Sceptic. It's like a classic Sly News, slippery style. It's like the Daily Sceptic. It's genius. He took out a letter, and thus you were, ensnared on the sword of his wit. Shocking stuff. Impaled, I meant.
Yeah, I've written about it for my Spectator column this week. I mean, I think it's part of a larger pattern amongst defenders of these kind of radical progressive policies. Instead of actually engaging in debate, instead of defending those policies, setting out the case for those policies, they just try and smear their opponents or pretend that they're so well supported by the science or the facts that no serious person could possibly disagree. There's this extraordinary reluctance to actually enter into a proper grown-up debate about these issues. And you begin to suspect, well, maybe it's because they're not terribly confident that their position is actually defensible.
You'd hope it could be that. I mean, really, he should just go to the Daily Sceptic website and, it should be a compliment, Toby, that he thinks that's funded by Big Fossil, does he really? I mean, it's good, but does he really look at the Daily Sceptic and think this has massive backing? It seems like a fairly, small passion-based project to me when I look at it. Even though it's good, I just think, I don't think Big Fossil when I see it particularly. But I love that they always think we're funded all the time.
Yeah, and it's a favourite go-to argument for George Monbiot too. Whenever anyone criticises his absolute kind of zealous green eco fanaticism, he immediately accuses them of being funded by big oil, rather than actually try and defend his position, set out the argument for net zero. He just immediately reaches for, Tufton Street, you're funded by big oil.
When you're morally superior, Toby, and your argument is unimpeachable, you don't need debate. You just need to say big oil.
I think one. I mean, maybe I'm being too charitable in assuming they're just not very confident that they could actually defend their position in a straight-up fair fight. Maybe they think, well, why do we need to bother? Because even if your side wins elections, we're still going to be in charge. So we don't need to bother with these kind of trivial democratic debates. Election results are meaningless. We'll be in control. So who cares if we lose the argument at the public square? We're not even going to waste our time waging it.
They just want to shut down the opposition. And speaking of which, my peak vote, which is also somewhat tenuous, but it's a very interesting topic, is this Vernal Scott at Oxford University, who was the Equality and Diversity Unit head. He used to be in Essex Police. I don't know why Oxford needs an Equality and Diversity Unit for a start, but that's a whole separate question. And he said, when NatCon was shut down, I applaud the mayor and police of Brussels for their decision to close down this conference. He actually tweeted that and later deleted it. I mean, what a shocking... I mean, it's not shocking at this point. It's not surprising, is it? But this guy with this made-up, pointless job saying, it was great when you shut down that totally legitimate conference with people like Suella Braverman and Viktor Orban, these sort of incredibly mainstream politicians, one of them runs a European country. You know what I mean? It's like, you thought that was great, and you're the Equality and Diversity Unit. I mean, what is going on, Toby? This is madness.
I mean, it's exactly the same tactic that Chris Packham used in his debate with Luke Johnson. It's a complete unwillingness to actually enter into the arena, to actually have an argument. Much better to use what power you have to smear and shut down your opponents.
Yeah.
And this guy, though, is supposed to be head of diversity. It just proves that diversity does not mean intellectual diversity. It doesn't mean diversity of opinion. It just means ethnic and social and sexual diversity. It doesn't mean the most important kind of diversity of them all.
Yeah, which shouldn't really surprise us at this point. Do you have any other ones, Toby, that you want to... Pete Wilkes, you want to chuck at me?
Yeah, so there was one I thought you might be quite shocked by, Nick. Scottish primary schools have appointed children as LGBT champions. So the children in Scottish primary schools are being asked by this taxpayer-funded charity called LGBT Youth Scotland. The schools are being urged to ask pupils as young as 4 to identify as either gay, lesbian or trans. I don't think those are the only 3 options, but they're saying if you feel like you might be one of these things, then come out and tell us now, 4-year-old children. Pretty extraordinary. And they've also been urging head teachers to install gender-neutral lavatories and mark Transgender Day of Remembrance. It's pretty extraordinary. Sir John Hayes, chairman of the Tory Common Sense Group, says those responsible for the outrage of approaching 4-year-olds in this way should be rounded up and charged with child abuse. Quite strong stuff there from Sir John Hayes.
Well,
but, pretty shocking.
I can see why. I've got a similar one here in the Times. NSPCC pushed trans ideology on children. Whistleblower claims it's Julia Marshall, 62, had volunteered with the organisation for more than 30 years, warned that it had been completely captured by Stonewall. Her concerns were first raised in 2019 when she noticed her supervisor had begun including her pronouns in her emails. She felt completely ostracised. She was suddenly amongst this weird cult. She's like, what's going on? And I felt like I was an alien. So they were talking about primary school children under 11, and it was a whole session on pronouns and trans children. And she said, how can you not see as a charity this is a safeguarding risk? The reaction was, well, you're weird. And even the statement from NSPCC, their spokesman's statement is actually even worse. They come out and say something simple like using a child's preferred pronouns is one way in which a young person can feel listened to and respected. Children don't have pronouns. 11-year-old children don't have they only think they have because you brainwashed them and told them they have. When you were 11, did you think, oh, I hope people respect my pronouns? You didn't know what it was. It's grooming. It says here that it risks grooming children. That's what I would say. I mean, it's the National Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Children, which makes me say you had one job and you couldn't do it. I mean, shocking. Not shocking in the sense of surprising, but in the sense of disturbing.
Yeah, and maybe marginally less disturbing, but with potentially more grave ramifications. And if you saw Steve Edgington's story, someone leaked a diversity course which members of MI6 had been forced to do, and amongst other things, they've been told to stop displaying alpha behaviours, including the qualities of strength and urgency. Look out for words like strong and grip, as they would reinforce dominant cultural patterns. Wear LGBT lanyards, stipulate what their preferred pronouns are, and learn from George Floyd's death. And it's just extraordinary.
This is MI6.
MI6.
Grip is bad. I'm like, oh, I'm in MI6. I can't hold things. I've got no grip. That's the most pathetic. Yeah. Strong urgency. Come on, let's get this done now. I think you might be demonstrating toxic urgency. What the fuck are they on about?
Yeah. M has been replaced by BLM, Q by LGBTQ, and when Bond introduces himself, now he goes, the name's Bond, James Bond, preferred pronouns, he, her. Or whatever, what would he, her? Yeah.
He, her. That sounds like a donkey. Yeah, that's shocking grip. So if you said get a grip in MI6, you'd be in big trouble.
You'd be in big
trouble. I love that. I mean, that's sort of the quiet part out loud, isn't it? Strength, masculinity, all those things are what are under attack. But to actually say it just sounds so absurd when you actually say strength is bad. You know, we praise weakness at all costs. It's so weird.
Yeah, and at some point you'd think kind of, I mean, if it's taboo, if it's reinforcing, you know, the patriarchy and cis heteronormativity to kind of aggressively kind of go after the enemies of the realm, then, you know, what are you supposed to do? How are you supposed to deal with, you know, suicide bombers kind of in Buckingham Palace? You're supposed to kind of, you know, read out sections from Judith Butler's PhD thesis in the hope that they'll realise that their aggressive male behaviour is just a social construct.
Yeah.
And it's just bizarre.
Someone sent me a screenshot of I think it's the head of MI6, and he had pronouns and he was praising Eid, talking about Eid. I can't remember who it was. Richard something? I don't know, I can't remember now.
Yeah.
Pretty disturbing. On a similar note, here in The Observer, outdated and offensive, police in England and Wales barred from blaming restraint deaths on excited delirium. This is this term, it sounds wonderfully Victorian. She died of excited delirium and a broken heart. She had an excessive case of nervousness, you know. But it's an old phrase, but this was used for people like George Floyd. Again, it comes up here. And then they changed it to acute behavioural disturbance, which is used more commonly in Britain. But even that is thought to be controversial, but is going to be on the way out at some point. So it's this worry about you can't call people... Basically, it's as Chris Rock said, whatever happened to crazy? You can't call people excited or crazy anymore because the history of it... Well, apparently it goes back, according to this, the term originated in Miami in the 1980s after 32 black women who worked as sex workers were found dead, naked from the waist down and with no obvious injuries. A medical examiner concluded they must have died from cocaine and sex, a phenomenon he termed excited delirium. So that phrase has gone now.
On the subject of becoming overexcited and slightly delirious, I think those were my reactions to this story. according to a museum guide in the Royal Museums of Greenwich, Queen Charlotte was a person of colour, and this was revealed in a kind of audio guide called Fierce Royals, and which claimed to be a very gay guide to Queen Charlotte's house in Greenwich. And it actually says Queen Charlotte was the nation's first royal person of colour. Yep, you heard me. The insecure white boys writing history conveniently forget to mention that bit because, well, structural racism. In fact, there's no evidence at all Queen Charlotte was a person of colour. And she was played by a person of colour in Bridgerton, the TV series, which was kind of ridiculed for its kind of ludicrously woke casting decisions. But it's as though this kind of gay historian is basing his historical research on watching Bridgerton on Netflix rather than actually looking up any of the documents. I mean, absolutely extraordinary. I mean, there are paintings of Queen Charlotte, and she's not remotely a person of colour. And yet this is what children going around this particular museum listening to this monologue, Fierce Royals, are being told.
It talks about, I remember this, we covered this on GB News, I don't have it in front of me, but it talked about insecure white boys, didn't it?
That was
as well,
weird, yeah.
As part of the museum. It's like, who are they employing at the racist children? Why are they talking about insecure white boys? Here's the piece now. The audio guide for the Royal Museums Greenwich tells visitors that despite what insecure white boys have said, George III's wife was the first British royal from a non-white background. I mean, it's like, you go, girl. These are just insecure white boys. Why is that kind of crap in a museum?
I suppose he's describing, every historian that's written about this period and has identified Queen Charlotte as white, or at least has neglected to mention that she was a person of colour. He's trying to demean them by describing them as insecure white boys. And the reason they've neglected to mention her dark skin, not only because they're insecure and white, but because of structural racism. Structural racism in it.
Yeah. Well, he admits, this guy, Christian Adore, a self-declared homosexual historian seeking to share deliciously gay stories from the past. So there you go. We're back to the deliciously gay stuff again. It's back to the Tory MPs again. We'll probably get in trouble for homophobia in this episode, just for pointing out that there's a lot of scandals in the Tory party. Is that homophobic? I don't know. Let's do this one. This is sort of a Pete woke, I'm calling it, and maybe I'm stretching it again. This is a Channel 4 accused of left-wing bias over election night panel. I just thought it was funny. I don't know if it's quite woke, but I just thought it was funny that the election night panel is just completely biased and ridiculous. I'm sure you saw it. They released it, and it was, first was Cathy Newman, who sort of, I'm amazed, still has a career after being destroyed by Jordan Peterson, and she revealed herself to be a total lefty there, so we know her views. Rory Stewart, who, I don't know how he was ever a Tory. He said he might vote Lib Dem, surprising no one at all. Krishnan Guru Murthy, shouty, rude lefty. Emily Maitlis couldn't hide the fact she was a lefty on BBC. Now doesn't attempt to hide it at all on LBC. Even more lefty nutter than we thought. Alistair Campbell, I mean, do we need to explain that one? And Tony Blair's right-hand man. And then Claire Balding, who at least can ride a horse. Not really sure what her political views are. And it was this funny picture of them all together. I said, like Avengers Assemble, except they're all evil and have no special abilities. No, I was making evil as a joke because, they're superheroes. And Simon Evans said Avengers Dissemble, which was quite good. What do you think?
I think as a GB News presenter and as an occasional GB News contributor, we should welcome this. I mean, part of the argument for GB News is that all the mainstream broadcasters are biased to the left, and their rebuttal is, no, you are a rogue Fox News-like broadcaster, we're all impartial, you're openly right-wing, and that's a break with the great tradition in British broadcasting of being politically unbiased, politically neutral, particularly during important events like general election campaigns. And here's Channel 4 openly, effectively saying the quiet part out loud. Okay, we're not going to pretend to be impartial or politically neutral. We're just going to hire these left-wing pundits to participate on our general election night coverage. So in a way, it's good. It makes it easier for you to defend yourself from Ofcom when they accuse you of political bias. So yeah, but look at Channel 4.
Yes, I'm sure they'll be totally impartial and they'll see that, Toby. But yeah, I mean, that's one point. That's one point we could use. I mean, I'd be fine if we did, if we didn't have Ofcom and everyone could just be openly left and openly right and things like that. But Channel 4 are still state-owned, aren't they? So that creates a bit of a problem when you're going to do that.
Yeah.
So I'd say it's much worse even than if GB did it. Anyway, that is my Pete. Well, I think that's pretty much all my Pete Wokes. But do you have any more, Toby?
Well, there was this one. It's so serious, it's almost doesn't belong in this section. But a failed asylum seeker, 40 years old, from I think Senegal. An attempt was made to deport him because he's an illegal in 2005. And the deportation was stopped by an Air France cabin crew. Who rebelled on the plane, and he had to be taken off, and he was never deported. He has just pleaded guilty to raping a 15-year-old girl. This is in the UK. So, you would hope that the Air France cabin crew who prevented him from being deported might have an attack of conscience now. I mean, they really should be forced to apologise to the parents and this 15-year-old girl. Really pretty shocking.
Yeah, absolutely shocking. There's loads of stories like that, but if you say them, you'd be called racist, but then they're real. So, yeah. Okay, yeah, like you say, quite dark for Peak Woke, but there we go. It was good to get it in at least. I think that's pretty much it. I mean, that's pretty much it for the show. Thanks to everyone for listening and indeed watching in our new studio. I hope it was okay with the setup. We've got the new laptops. I kept touching my neck because I'm in agony from the gym. The usual kind of Nick stuff. We do a 3-hour show on that. If you subscribe, it's called Nick's Health Problems. And that show, it was not out yet, but it's forthcoming. So go to basedmedia.org for that. And for our other stories we're about to cover, we're going to do gender ideology in mainstream comedy. Have I got news for you? Doing a joke about gender ideology. Joe Lycett said cancel culture was good. And we've got a few other stories, and we've got the base department. That's all on the extra section. If you go to basedmedia.org, sign up for £5 a month, and you get Bombshells and Weekly Sceptic and lots of other stuff. You get the Zoom call if you pay for the silver tier, whatever we're calling it. And I think that is pretty much it. And of course, if you want to support me, it's buymeacoffee.com/Nick Dixon. NickDixon.net for all my Substack stuff, which has extra content from my other podcasts and all my articles, my brilliant articles about novels and all sorts of stuff, cultural things. I think that's it. Toby, any plugs?
Yeah, I wanted to draw our listeners and viewers' attention to the fact that the Daily Skeptic, or the Daily Sceptic, as I should perhaps be calling it, is advertising for a new associate editor. We're expanding. We're going to create a Daily Skeptic podcast called the Weekly Roundup. And we're also going to be introducing some premium content. We're looking for a new associate editor to present this podcast, to be the Nick Dixon of the Weekly Roundup, though ideally it'll be a woman.
You sure you don't want to change that name? It is incredibly similar to the Weekly Sceptic. People are going to get very confused.
Well, it's we do the Daily Roundup, which is the newsletter you get. It includes the daily news roundup, so we thought the Weekly Roundup would be a good name. The Weekly Sceptic is taken, obviously. I think people might be a little bit confused, but this will be an entirely separate podcast, filmed in this studio, I think.
Right.
But we're looking for someone
copying all my segments that I've invented for the Weekly Sceptic, copying the whole structure.
No, it'll be completely different. But we're looking for someone to host that. So someone who knows about the kind of subject matter we cover, ideally someone who's scientifically literate, who can interview me and Will and our other contributors, and do the kind of job you do on the Weekly Sceptic.
Okay.
So anyway, if you're interested in that job, we'll also want them to contribute and maybe host our new Discord community, which we're about to unveil. If you're interested in doing that job, it's at the moment it's part-time, but it will go to full-time. Go to the Daily Sceptic website, dailyskeptic.org, and you can find out more about it and how to apply there.
Okay. All right, fair enough. I mean, it's quite tricky. Somebody who knows about science and can also has the charisma of Nick Dixon. It's a unicorn, but hope you find it. Anything else?
No, that's pretty much it. But
okay.
I guess encourage people, if they want to hear the rest of this show and discover the premium content on Bombshells, subscribe for as little as £5 a month at basemedia.org.
Basemedia.org. And for everyone else, until next week, stay skeptical.
Stay skeptical.